Sports fans. In this segment, I'm going to discuss the Wolverines game against the Badgers on Saturday. Again, much like the Hoosiers game, to call this game a game from the Wolverines standpoint would be very, very generous. I didn't think they could sink much lower than they did against the Hoosiers, but somehow on national TV at night, they managed to. The Badgers had the ball for over 45 minutes of that game. I have never heard of a college football team doing that before. I'm sure it's happened, but I've never heard of it. In fact, the only time, thinking back on it, that I've heard of a football team controlling the ball that much was the Dolphins against the Colts back when Peyton Manning was playing for them. And even with that, the Colts still managed to win the game, actually 27-24. But that is the only time I've ever heard of that happening. Not only that, the Badgers, I believe, had 27 first downs to 12. They outgained the Wolverines on the ground 347 to 41, I believe it was, and even outpassed them. The one highlight for the Wolverines was their backup quarterback, whose name I believe is Cade Alexander, getting a touchdown pass and getting the 2-point conversion. When that is a highlight, and the only highlight for the Wolverines in Ann Arbor, you know it's bad. In fact, the Badgers scored more points against the Wolverines than they ever had before. I don't know when the last time the Wolverines scored that few points in a game. I didn't research that, but if I get a chance, I'll get back to you on that. It was also the Badgers' largest margin of victory ever, and it was the worst home defeat by the Wolverines since the Buckeyes beat them in 1935. And bear in mind, Woody Hayes was not even the coach back in 1935 of the Buckeyes. It was simply a totally horrific effort. And as you might imagine, there's been a lot of talk about Jim Harbaugh this week. A lot of people would like him fired. I'm surprised he wasn't fired after the Hoosiers game or asked to resign. I'm even more surprised that he wasn't asked to resign after this game. I'm assuming the Wolverines are going to try to ride out the season with him. There have been talks about extending his contract. I don't think that's going to happen. He's got a year left on it. I don't think he's going to be the Wolverines head coach next season. I don't think he's earned that right. But what's really gone through my mind, aside from all that, I've been thinking about two things. One is Mike Greenberg on ESPN's Get Up today was citing some facts about Jim Harbaugh as an NFL head coach. I did not realize he was the 5th winningest head coach in NFL history and the 2nd winningest head coach in 49ers history behind George Seifert. And while I agree with him that Jim Harbaugh is probably going to end up in the NFL and he may even be the Jets' next head coach, one thing he left out is that Jim Harbaugh was very successful as the head coach of the Stanford Cardinal. This is why I'm surprised, because he has been successful as a head coach as far as I know wherever he's gone. And why he hasn't been able or come close to being able to do it as the Wolverines head coach, I have no idea. I mean, I'm about as stumped as anybody, including perhaps Jim Harbaugh himself. But by now, he's got to recognize the fact that this is not working out. I mean, he's not beating the Buckeyes. He's 3-3 against the Spartans, which is okay, but he's only beaten them once in Ann Arbor, which is not good. And he just simply has not brought to the Wolverines what I would have wanted to see him bring and what I think a lot of people's expectations are of what he would bring. I mean, they've never been the Big Ten championship game. They haven't been the college football playoff. And I think everybody would have expected that. And that would have been very reasonable. I mean, the Spartans have been there 2 or 3 times, and yet the Wolverines haven't? Something wrong with that. And not only that, I don't feel like Jim Harbaugh is improving the football program at all. So that was one thing that went through my mind, was Mike Greenberg's comments. The other one is, I've been thinking about what Bo Schembechler would be saying about this. And what occurred to me is, he would be saying, Jim, you can't lose to Indiana. No Michigan man would do that. And no Michigan man would get pummeled like that by the Badgers. I mean, he would have torn into him something fierce. And unfortunately, if he were still around, I think he would have had at least one heart attack just from this, or I should say another heart attack. And bear in mind, for those of you who don't know him, he had 3 heart attacks in his lifetime, 2 while he was the head coach of the Wolverines. Now, he did not take losing very well, and he took it about as hard as anybody I have ever seen, both on his body and otherwise. He was a heck of a coach, and I don't know what kind of person. I never had the privilege of meeting him, but he was a heck of a coach, and this is why he's regarded as the greatest head coach in Wolverines history, I would say. And if he's not, then he's got to be second for sure. But to watch the Wolverines fall this far is beyond embarrassing. And while Jim Harbaugh called Saturday's game against Rutgers a must-win, which I would agree with him, and I believe he used the term, to paraphrase, that the Wolverines would win at any cost, they need to play a lot better. In the next segment, or I'm sorry, 2 segments, no, next segment, I'm sorry, I will discuss what I would do if I were Jim Harbaugh in order to help ensure the Wolverines beat the Scarlet Knights. But I think even if the Wolverines win out this season, don't expect to see Jim Harbaugh as the head coach of the Wolverines next year. I'm frankly surprised that he still is. In the next segment, I will preview the Wolverines game on Saturday against the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Stay tuned to College Football Recap on Ed's Sports Channel.